appreciate everybody joining. We might have some folks dropping by as we go. My name is Chris. I've been doing volunteer stuff with Agitare now since probably like February or whenever I bothered Dan, and then he was like, hey, I do this thing and I'm trying to make a community. But anyway, what we decided to try to do over the last couple months was get a little more active as a community and start doing some outward facing stuff. And of that came the idea to do this thing called a Fishbowl. But I saw the idea of transparent communication, doing something outward and forward facing. I kind of look at it as like a business meeting. I mean, you were just a community, but like in my company, we do business meetings and you can dial into a call and listen to these people talk about big numbers and stuff. And you never really have a chance to have input or kind of make a point yourself. And so what we want to do is kind of flip that around a little bit, sort of the unconference style, where we have an open forum. We kind of talk through, in this case, we're going to go around the room and kind of say like what brought us as the Agitare leadership team kind of into facilitation, what the journey's been like the last probably 10 months or so now, and talk about it in front of you guys, and then if you have questions about like, what is the community that I've now joined? How does it relate to things I do, or really whatever, there's not many rules. These conversations are usually just inspired and kind of take off in their own directions, which is what we love anyway. Feel free to drop in and ask questions. So with that, I think I'll start with Dan, just because it makes sense. And while we have him with a good connection. So I just want to ask you, Dan, not really in like the, I'm facilitating this event, but like, how's it been the last 10 months, man? I just want to hear you talk about like where we are since we started this project with you.
Yeah, for sure. Just first, I want to double check that y'all can see and hear me okay, because I can't see video, but I'm assuming that's a connection issue on my
You're still good.
Gotcha,
all right,
man.
sweet.
That's like the number one question of 2020. Can you hear me?
Yeah. I feel really good about where Agitare is right now. My journey into this space, I've kind of shared this a few times, but I spent a few years kind of training up on various design methods, facilitated discovery methods, through self-teaching and through introductory courses and like boot camps in human-centered design, design thinking, think wrong, warfighter-centered design, and all of that. And what I found was that I was expending all of my energy just trying to convince people to allow me to put these things into practice. And I realized that I needed something that I had when I was at the 70th, and we had a small team who was getting after this together. And there was that kind of there was that mutual building up and support and doing retrospectives and continuing to refresh every time something went wrong and we would try again. It was much easier to do when it wasn't as an isolated kind of facilitator out in the wilderness there. So I just reached out to a few people who I knew were interested, and I just pretended like this community already existed, and we started doing events. And where we are now, having done this for I think 8 months or so, is well beyond my wildest dreams of what we could have become. I feel like we have achieved significant momentum. We've got things like this, which are a huge milestone for me, which are events that are being hosted by members of the community, members of the leadership team, without my involvement at all. And that is a huge thing for me, because one thing that I wanted to make happen after about 6 months of operations, one thing that I really wanted to make happen was decouple this thing from me personally. I want to be able to drop off the face of the earth and have Agitare keep going. If it's because I think that personality-driven organizations there's a significant weakness to that, right? If they lose interest or lose focus or lose the vision or lose people's attention or whatever it is, there's that like single point of failure. So we've been doing a couple of events recently that have gone really well. We've got massive engagement on the LinkedIn front and growth in the Slack community. So and those are all, for me, like I not only can I like feel it, but the metrics are there, right? So that's just to say that I think that we are going great places and we're engaging more and more people as we go, like a kind of like a snowball rolling downhill. So I feel pretty good about where the community is.
Yeah, that's phenomenal. I kind of want to pick on Austin now just because I feel like he came in and got a lot more active right around that 6 month mark. But before that, man, if you'll take a chance as well, Austin, you know, you and I kind of talked about what this Fishbowl thing would be. I want you to start by telling me what you thought this was going to be or hoped it might be, and then your journey in design and facilitation and whatever else you want to add to that. I'm playing the host now.
Yeah. When you say what you thought this would be, what are you talking about specifically? The Fishbowl?
The Fishbowl, yeah.
Okay. So yeah, you and I had talked about it. Well, first of all, hi everybody. I'm Austin Wiggins. My official title is Chief Philosophy Officer at Agitare, and we can talk about what that means in a little bit because it's weird. Well, it's different. We'll call it different. We won't call it weird. But I think in my participation here with Agitare, there's a little proof to the pudding in it being a little bit weird. But first of all, let's talk about the Fishbowl. Chris and I had gone back and forth about what we wanted the Fishbowl to be, and we've gotten other people, including Cuss, to talk about, you know, where we think the Fishbowl, where this event could steer. Right now, you know, for this specific event, we just want to be as transparent as possible about sort of our own narrative storylines about how we got here to Agitare leadership, to be just as clear as possible, because I feel like when you get into a new thing, new whatever, you can get stuck in like, well, how do I get from starting to you know, to this level, to Daniel's level of facilitation? Not that that's the end point, because Daniel himself, I'm sure he will admit, and I'll even have to ask him, that he has room to grow, because that's just the nature of this process.
Yeah, just to be very clear, I am very much at the beginning of my journey here, but I think just to tap on that idea, we don't have that many people within the defense community who I would consider to be like master level facilitators, right? Which means that in many circles, we are the experts at this.
Yes.
Which, if you know people in the commercial sector, I don't think that says great things about the defense community, but that's why we need Agitare.
Exactly.
That's a great point. That was solid. Well put.
And so this is sort of the starting point to showing like, hey, we have only started facilitating for X amount of time. We're not experts by any means. We're people experimenting with these concepts, just like we want you to do. We're emulating the exact same behavior, so that when you are coming into Agitare, you can see that that's what we're doing. So that's sort of my idea of this Fishbowl in terms of for this event. For future iterations, it can turn to a lot of things, but we'd like to keep it experimental. So if you have any suggestions, feel free to put them down in chat. If you're in the Agitare Slack, feel free to send them to Chris or myself personally, or in the events page under the Fishbowl event, you could just add like a thread to that event and just like, this was great, this sucked, this was this, it can improve this way, so on and so forth. For me, how I got into design, it happened the way that most things happen for me, in like a roundabout sort of way. I got introduced to human-centered design 2 to 3 years ago. I, at the time, wait, what are you saying? 1 sec for me, Chris? Okay. At the time, I was heavily into writing fiction and stuff like that. And so I was, you know, writing fiction, and I was also thinking a lot about the nature of fiction and what roles fiction plays in society, what roles does fiction play for the writer who writes fiction. And so I stumbled on human-centered design as a way to be like, well, how does this design process fit into the process of writing fiction? So I wrote a couple of articles on my now defunct blog about human-centered design and the intersection between human-centered design and fiction. It was an interesting space to be in, but I sort of just kind of left it there. It was sort of more of a mental exploration than anything. Then 6 months ago, no, it was, 6 months ago. God, time's flying by. I joined the 70th ISRW's Wing Innovation Team, where Master Sergeant Harbin, who's in the leadership team, he's not here today, but is on the leadership team, was doing a lot of facilitated methods and, picking up sort of where Daniel and others left off in the subject of wing innovation to carry facilitation and other innovative practices into our wing. And so I kind of picked up from there with what I knew from my research, as it were, into the intersections between fiction and human-centered design, and started exploring classes like Joint Special Operations University had a design fundamentals course, which is, I can't express enough how much it was fundamental to how I practice my own facilitation. In that they talk about, methodological things, and I'm super on board of having more of the mindset than having any specific practice. And then, believe it or not, my first facilitation happened maybe 2-3 months ago. And ever since then, I've sort of just ramped up the speed of my facilitations. Going from my first one that was, 3 months ago to having a facilitated event now. I think I'm right about at once a week now of having some type of facilitated event. And then we could talk about how I got into Agitare, but that might be another topic. I'll stop there.
No, that's great, man. I love the tie-in to just, it started off with writing and fiction, and then you come all the way full circle into this year, and COVID happens and you have so much more time, and you're like, all right, facilitation it is. I will say, like, as soon as I jumped into it, I was kind of like you. I just wanted more. And I'll save mine for the end here, but first I want to hit Dustin and Steven as well real quick. So yeah, what's up, Dustin? I think I'm kind of guilty for like dragging you into Agitare originally. I was just like, show up, log on, get in Slack, get on Miro. And you were like, what's Miro? What's Slack?
Yeah.
So I think you can blame me, but yeah, man, I'd love to hear just kind of your journey here, and then just Agitare to you over the last 10 months or so.
Yeah, my name is Dustin Thomas. I just separated active duty Air Force just about 8 or 9 months ago, about almost as long as we've been with Agitare now. And it came up just in a casual conversation. I think we were going down rabbit holes. Chris and I met through LinkedIn, and we were just chatting, and you're like, oh, well, like there's this design thinking, and then there's Agitare, but that's a whole separate conversation. I was like, well, what is it? I got hooked. One of the first videos I stumbled across was Daniel's video on I think it was the Cawcast is what it was called. And I was like, who is this guy? Like, total fan moment. I added Daniel on LinkedIn and shot him a message and was like, dude, like, at your service. And then he replied to my message, and it was the best day of my life. I was like, who is this guy? Like, how's he talk like this? How does he know everything he knows? So Chris, you sent me down a rabbit hole that I think, I lost a lot of sleep, just trying to understand what everything was for the next few weeks. And then went down, I pulled out an old book I had called Cracked It. And when I was on active duty on my last tour in Qatar, I was trying to solve problems out in the open. And I had this book, and there were like 3 chapters. There was an issue-driven tree, a hypothesis-driven approach, and then there was this chapter on design thinking. I never opened the design thinking chapter because it always said, this is what you do for really long problems. And I was like, well, I don't have the time for that. We're here. We want immediate solutions. We want to do things quickly, and I want everyone involved. And so it's funny to unravel this as we've grown with Agitare, and we do all these facilitations, and the transparency that's there. I felt like I was always trying to do this, but never knew the words facilitation and design thinking were never part of my vocabulary. We would just pull up an Excel sheet, we would get on a whiteboard, and we would try to openly solve and solicit ideas, but we never had any toolkits. We never had any frameworks to really do it. And it was all because I never opened the last chapter of this book. So it's always funny looking back in hindsight. My goal since being here is just aspiring to be a better facilitator. I feel like I have the least experience of the team here, but every day being around you guys, being involved with Agitare makes me a better facilitator than I was yesterday and the month before that and the month before that. So as far as goals, just trying to get better, trying to get more familiar and add toolkits to the toolbox. But what did I miss anything, Chris? That's been my journey so far. It's always interesting in hindsight looking back, but it's been an awesome. Just glad you guys have brought me along through the process.
Yeah, you nailed it. That was great. I think I can definitely I'll let Steven go, and then I'm gonna have something that ties in with your kind of journey there really well, I think. All right, Steven, I saved the best for last, big man.
Oh, geez.
Hopefully you're not in a coffee shop or something.
No, I'm in the house, so I apologize for the lack of video. But of course, internet won't be installed till tomorrow. And my family and I, we have this knack for having the wrong service provider for your phone, no matter where you PCS to. So that's just one of the things I kind of swallow. And we're switching over tonight, so we're excited about that. Everything should be good tomorrow. But Steve Ogie, labeled as the Chief Conversational Officer for Agitare, and for very good reason, which I'll get to. I'm just going to throw a big yes and that would be under Daniel Holter. I guess this is going to turn into a huge toot the horn of Dan here. But as COVID kicked off, I had just finished off my degree in marketing management and realized that the business side isn't what I loved, but the marketing and thinking and design was. So I really started going down the rabbit hole of design and looking at courses and what was available and what was free. And then as COVID kicked off and everything turned digital, I was like, this is an opportunity to get back on LinkedIn, just to update my profile. And while I was there, I started looking up design thinking there. And I just randomly found Dan and some of his posts. And I'm like, wow, this guy actually sounds legit. So just kind of followed him and saw where he was at, saw all these things. And from there, I saw something from the cause. So we have Mike in here, Mike Lavery, so this is a good segue too, right? So I'm like, oh, that seems pretty cool. So I got on the cause website, signed up for Warfighter Center Design back in, I want to say April, went through the course, loved the course, loved the ideas. I'm like, I want to learn more about this. I want to eat more, signed up for the Mission Accelerator, finally went to the MSM. So all of these things. And then I saw these opportunities to get into the Agitare from there, and from getting on the Def Slack and all these things. It was just tons of connections that I never knew existed, just by the virtue of COVID-19 kind of pushing us to say, hey, what's available out there, and just being hungry enough to look, and just being super lucky of seeing the right post at the right time. And then finally, when I sat through a Discovery 101 session, I remember I got on Slack and I'm like, this is what I want. I want more of this. Like, consider me a champion. Anything I can do to help. And they're like, well, you can jump into the next facilitation practice. And I was like, sure, like that. And ever since then, it's just been a sprint. Like, what else can we do? What else can we learn? And I think that's the biggest thing for me, is I just love to talk. Yeah, you definitely nailed it in chat. Just thinking and practicing and spreading the love as well. Everything that we take from this, all the notes that we do, like, I'm always looking to engage in conversation with people locally here too, and just seeing that fire get sparked in their eyes. And that's what I love about Agitare is, I think our biggest thing is we facilitate experiences. It's not just getting to the solution to the problem, but also allowing people to get comfortable with sitting in that problem space and learning and wanting to do this themselves. So that's why I'm here. Absolutely love it. And always looking forward to more opportunities.
Yeah, that's awesome, guys. I just wanted to run around the room this first time. Depending on how many people we get coming to these, like if we do them monthly or whatnot, we probably won't run intros like this every time. But for me, my journey is kind of interesting. I guess just talking about my journey to facilitation, to design. I actually think my journey to facilitation started as a really young kid. Depending on what experiences you might have had growing up, you could have found yourself in positions where somebody was vulnerable, and what you needed was the ability to empathize. And I did find myself in places like that. And I would say coming through high school is probably a good frame of reference, right? a lot of my friend group, and then not necessarily my friend group, but even, people from other groups, right? Because in high school, everybody clicks up. And that was, or maybe they still do. I don't know. Yeah, I'm old now, but I noticed that a lot of people would be willing to just have conversation with me because I wouldn't judge them up front at all. I might be critical of their decision-making process, or try to find a way to give them good feedback that might seem critical, but they would know based off the way, that I interacted with them, that it was coming from a good place. I think when I got in the military, my first experience with facilitation, like what I would call real facilitation, even though obviously it wasn't design centered per se, was doing things like suicide awareness chats, grabbing 15 people from different backgrounds and putting them in a room and discussing mental health, psychological issues, safety, things that now I have a better kind of frame of reference around than I did probably when I was, in my late teens, early 20s. But if that's from the academic side, I still felt like there was that facilitation that I was building. I know that now as I've gotten a little bit more into facilitation, having those tough discussions, and getting comfortable with that, just the deliberate discomfort, which is something we actually have talked about before as well. Being okay with that, and being okay with being a little bit humble in front of other people, humbling yourself. And sometimes, it can be somewhat humiliating, but embracing that in a group, and knowing that nobody there is there to judge you. The uniform adds that layer of trust a lot of times, but there's also times as I've gotten better and looked more into design that I've found that it can just as quickly tear apart the room as it can kind of flatten us into a common lane of thought. So it's a really, really interesting journey, I guess I would say I've had. COVID has definitely given me the opportunity, especially jumping on board with Agitare, to push my limits in a totally different way, to put a little bit more thought behind what I'm doing, to care more than just about the discussion, but a lot about the follow through, and kind of the what's next. A lot of times getting into those tough conversations, you just want to get through them. And I think that's what we do a lot in the military environment. And so what I've learned from design, I think, and what my journey as a facilitator has been, is not just being stuck with that, let's get through this tough conversation, but let's go through it together and see what we can find on the other side. What potential's out there, what good is in this, even if the discussion is terrible all the way through. What can we find coming out the other side? So I know that wasn't as quick as I wanted to be, but those were my 3 minutes. That's been my journey thus far. Now the Fishbowl kind of gets real. We got to make something happen and start rambling.
Yeah, I kind of want to just highlight a couple of things that I'm hearing there that are, across all of those stories, because I'm getting super amped, just listening to the diversity of experiences that people are having, because that's kind of been my vision for this. Is I know that not everybody gets into this world the same way or is going to apply it in the same ways. This is part of it not being just like we're framework agnostic, right? Some people might just be trying to facilitate conversations better, and the principles of navigating complexity in like a conversation about psychological safety, those apply the same in a workshop about innovation, right? There are some extreme commonalities. There are some universal truths to what competencies you require as a facilitator. One of those some of those competencies aren't developed by reading about a subject, right? They come through deliberate practice. And one of the things that I've seen us do very successfully with Agitare is create uncomfortable but safe circumstances and then throwing each other into that fire, so that we're constantly being pushed, as opposed to us just being a bunch of disparate practitioners who are kind of out in the wilderness on our own. We wouldn't be like, I did it for a whole year out of Hawaii. I tried to convince people to give me opportunities to practice this stuff, and Agitare has provided me with ridiculous numbers of opportunity. Chris and I did this just absurd facilitation for Platform One, for their initial summit, and it was ridiculous, like what we were trying to tackle there, but we learned a ton from it. We gave people a positive experience, and so yeah, giving people a safe place to practice, giving people the confidence to try new things, also what Dustin touched on, which is giving people just the vocabulary, just starting with surrounding yourself with people who are using the vocabulary that you can then start to understand the world that you're trying to navigate, right? Just problem solving. Another thing is that the community, we like lift each other up. We give each other energy. We inspire each other to keep trying new practices. Austin is out here inventing new practices. And I'm like, oh crap, this guy is like, he's running laps around me. And here I thought I was like at the forefront of coming up with new frameworks and stuff. And he just hit the ground running. And it has been just so exciting that Agitare was was part of helping to make that happen. The other thing that I see really effectively happening within the Agitare community is connecting people to the real leaders and influencers in this space. We've got Toga, John Hawley, Mike Lavery, and the Caw crew, the folks at JSOW, all the people that I'm interviewing for In the Weeds, the folks over at Voltage Control, and now with me kind of in the belly of the beast over at AF Cyberworks, and I'm going to start aiming their Death Star lasers at the problems that Agitare is going to been trying to get after. So yeah, that's just a couple of things that I was hearing from other people's stories, and I'm just super stoked. Oh, like I wouldn't have gotten into designing space if it weren't for Agitare. Like that was because we had built a community, and Toga and Cuss were doing this ridiculous design effort that gathered all these people from across the community. And we've got somebody from designing space in here now. Mike Sherman is on the call, and that just reminds me that this is, that's like the whole snowball metaphor. We're picking up people as we go, and it's just getting bigger and bigger, and I feel really good about it.
Yeah, I have to say I feel good about it too. I mean, even getting to do this call, I never thought that when we did our first D101 that months later, within the same year, we'd be doing a Fishbowl event to talk about like how did we get here, because we actually have a story to tell, and there's something relevant that we feel like we have to say because we are making a community. I find that really inspiring. We've definitely just kind of let go of the snowball at this point to see where it goes. I guess that's kind of a perfect segue into like sort of like questions, if anybody has any.
Hey everyone, Cuss here. Thanks for tuning in to the first ever Agitare Fishbowl. Really excited to see this event take place and looking forward to contributing to many more in the future. Also check out Agitare Deep Reading Club and Confabulation. Those are both two very successful events that are going to be in its second and third weeks. So make sure you check those out. These are all examples of how the Agitare leadership team is prototyping and testing new ideas and will adapt to your liking. So make sure you comment, like, share, and subscribe so we can get that feedback and adapt those events. If you're not connected with us on LinkedIn, please do that. There'll be a link in the description below. And then if you want to get involved with Agitare, go to agitare.org and click on Get Involved, and that'll connect you with our community on Slack. All right, enough for me. Enjoy the rest of Fishbowl.
So my question to everybody in the leadership team is how they found themselves in the role that they're in within the leadership team, or at least, some of us have more ambiguous terms of role in leadership, and some of us are more specific. So I'd like to hear how you've kind of fit yourself into either an ambiguous or more specific role within Agitare.
Ooh.
I could start since I could start to make it less awkward. I'll start just to make it less awkward. I could start. I came in sort of with having no idea how I can help Agitare. I wanted to be in Agitare. I knew that I loved what they were doing. Everything about it was exactly what I think was needed. I had trouble figuring out how I can, fit myself into that leadership team and provide something of use. And so the first thing I did, because Chris was able to help me push me in that direction, was to sort of figure out Agitare values, right? We were at the time an organization that did things we're doing great things, but they weren't centered on any sort of values which we can, sort of tie back our actions to. So I started there, and at the same time, I read a pretty ridiculous job description on Medium. Somebody wrote like this gag job description of like a chief philosophy officer. And I was like, that sounds silly. Let's check it out. Because that's kind of how things work for me, is the things that are weird and different. Like there are nuggets of truth and silly. And so the whole job description was basically about a person who is internally structured to keep the company accountable for their actions, in terms of, why are they doing what they're doing? And is it aligning to things that they're supposed to be doing, that they value doing, and so on and so forth. If I had the Medium link offhand, I'd send it to you to look at, because it's really interesting. But even my own definition of what a chief philosophy officer is has evolved from the Medium post, in that there's a couple ads, right? There's the contrarian officer, which I like as my second title. Sometimes I just like to, it sounds bad, but push people to think the opposite of the way they're thinking, just to make sure that their current train of thought is the right one. And so you'll find me disagreeing, and most of the time I'm disagreeing. I believe the thing that I'm disagreeing with, which is what helps this be like a real thing. We talked or who was it? Was it Daniel Pink in Drive? I mentioned that book like every day. Maybe it was Drive. It was Originals. It was Originals by Adam Grant. Originals by Adam Grant. He talks about how having devil's advocates who actually believe the things that they're advocating for are more effective than having just like a randomly assigned devil's advocate. And luckily for me, I often find myself on like the fringe of opinions about things. So having this position to where I can be like, not necessarily completely disagreeing, like, well, that's interesting. Let's expand on this. Have you considered this, opposite opinion on it? And yes, it's very much a chief dissenting officer. I actually like that title a lot, because a lot of the times that's what it is. We dissent a little bit. I encourage a little bit of dissent. I think even Air Force leadership structures encourage dissent. It's embedded in a lot of Air Force doctrine. It's not practiced a lot in Air Force for various cultural reasons, but it is embedded in doctrine that a part of followership is respectful dissent. And that's just a matter of addressing people the way they need to be addressed, while also dissenting on an opinion and showing good faith in the decision regardless, which is more or less what I do. Basically, my job is to be a pretty good follower of the ideals of Agitare. So more than to Daniel as the founder of Agitare, I find myself attached to the ideals of Agitare and defending that, which could one day put Daniel and I at ends. If he's like, Agitare should be this, I'm like, well, Agitare is this. Let's go ahead and butt heads about this and talk about it. But that's my position here, and where we're structured now, as we're moving into this first, not fiscal quarter, but just regular annual quarter, starting in January. We're poised to start looking at how to use values. Obviously, they help guide action, but more than action, they help guide decision making. So, for instance, if Agitare was stuck between two options, we would use our values as a compass to sort of navigate which option to choose. And that's good, but it's not the end all be all in terms of how an organization can steer. And so now we're trying to bore down a little bit to the principles level to find some general guidance in terms of how, in what specific scenarios do us as leadership need to act in which way. And that's all going to come from values and ranking those values. So that's sort of how I came to Agitare. That's how I became the chief philosophy officer or the chief dissent officer. And that's sort of where we're heading towards in that direction. Long story short.
That's awesome.
Yeah,
I find it so interesting that your ability to be comfortable dissenting has added to your availability to Agitare. Like you know that you can dissent amongst this, the way we've set it up right now, the way the community is. And I feel like, I mean, whether you know it or not, I feel like that's driven you to be that much more invested because of the safety of thought. Like you can totally come in and say, I disagree 100%. And we're okay with that. You might even flip other people's, minds. It's just so cool to have that experience. Go ahead, Daniel. I know you got to have something to follow up on that.
Yeah, no, definitely. Like I think that Austin is such a crucial member of the team for that reason, because he adds an incredible degree of internal complexity to our organizational structure. I talk about internal complexity as it relates to navigating external complexity. That's actually how, like, in order to deal with external complexity and unknown, like encountering unknown circumstances, you need internal complexity, which allows you to adapt and change and respond to new information. And most organizations make the mistake of becoming too aligned and too structured internally, which causes them to be rigid, which will cause them to break when they encounter, like it's a degree of brittleness, right? So in order to actually navigate as an organization, especially as a nebulous an organization as we are, right? We're very values driven, and those values have to inform actions, and how those values inform actions has to be malleable. It has to be changeable. So having people like Austin on the team, and everybody else has been pretty good about, I think that we've achieved a pretty decent degree of psychological safety, in that we kind of practice what we preach, which is, for me, everything that Agitare does is an opportunity to practice the skills that we're trying to promote, which is really exciting for me, because even if we didn't bring in a broad community of other practitioners across the Department of Defense, I am extremely confident that the people who are participating on the leadership team are getting an enormous amount of value out of just, the practice of growing and navigating our community as it is right now. So, and everything that Austin just described is a key component of that.
Yeah, I have to agree. I find it so interesting that the leadership team is made up, other than you, the founder, right, of people who didn't really come and like knock on the door. It was just people who busted in. Not that they were necessarily invested from the get-go, but they got involved immediately. And I think there's so much power in that. From my end, I think I've got myself labeled as like the thought tinkerer or something. I don't know how that ties into my persona here on the Agitare leadership team, but I find myself tinkering with my own thoughts almost as much as I do when I facilitate for others. And a lot of times I find that that's what it is when you're facilitating, especially to folks who've never been introduced to design concepts and, had to think a totally different way. We were talking about think wrong earlier. They had to think wrong, right? From what they've been taught institutionally or from whatever background they come from. So I find myself wanting to dabble in that constantly. It is so interesting to me to see people kind of have that aha moment sometimes. And it can take, an hour and a half into a session before things really do kick off and you start seeing tons of generation, or it can be immediately. You never know what you're going to get with facilitation. And I love that complexity. You put 3 people on a phone call, you never know where the conversation is going to go. You put 20 or 30 people on a Miro board and you start having them drop sticky notes and having them inspire one another and having links and chains and causalities that just go on and on and on. I think that's what I've really loved from the Agitare leadership team perspective. I would probably say I don't really know what my role has been. I'm there. I've been curious every time I've stepped into a room with us, whether it's on a random leadership call, we do something, a one-off like a P1, or we do a special thing like a Bespin, we're running for an Air Force squadron. To me, it doesn't matter. If I can just get humans to want to take a little bit of time out of their day, the value for me from Agitare is what we can return out. That's honestly what motivates me, is people giving us just a little bit of time to do this with them. I find so much value in that. I think I almost feel bad for the reward that I get and the satisfaction I get from just facilitating with other people or facilitating sessions that we run. It's really fun. And I'm totally inspired by the connections that we have now through JSAL, through the call, like we mentioned earlier. Shout out to Mike over here. And then networking into even the professional and academic realms. You know, I've touched base at this point with academic institutions, professors that are out there. You know, Karen Hold is one I'm reminded of recently. Like, even if it's just a side conversation or a quick comment, like you're directly connected now through this community, or in my case, I am with some of these folks at just a message, and you know that they'll respond. So I've enjoyed that aspect of it. Great question, Austin. That kicked off a 20-minute conversation.
I do what I can. I like you talked about having like even 2 to 3 people, which I'm not going to plug my whole thing right now, but I might anyway. So I've been thinking along the same lines of, yes, we're used to doing facilitated things, you know, with a group of people. But some of our conversations together have led me to start believing that there can be great individual value in just 2 people, like one facilitator and one person who, in the sole purpose is just to further the introspection of the other. We've decided to call that idea tandem reflection, which I think is brilliant. I love it. But that idea that first of all, people in themselves are, whether they like to admit it or not, a very complex people in terms of, yes, we have very complicated processes within us. Yeah, tandem reflection, it's super new. You can't Google it anywhere. It's made up. And that's sort of the fun part about all this. Tandem, yes, tandem reflection. Yeah, we need it, right? Yes, tandem. The idea that one facilitator and the other person can together create deeper, meaningful reflection and insight using facilitated practices just on a one-on-one level. So we're sort of bridging the ideas of like coaching, mentoring, design thinking, personal development, sort of kind of bridging some gaps between all of those things to figure out how it can work on this interpersonal one-on-one level. Because people are complex, right? We have a lot of complexity within us, and without a means to suss it out in some way, and some people use therapy for that way, which I love therapy. I go to therapy. It's great. I recommend it. But it's, you know, it's not the only method of which one can sort of parse out their own inner complexity. I think tandem reflection can be a very handy tool to do this. It's just, you reminded me of this, what you said was like, it very much embodied like even 2 people being internally complex can come out with something interesting together, as long as we facilitate it in the right way.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I've had one-on-one conversations with a number of you guys, and I think I even made the joke recently in our Slack when we were having a question about like, what was this going to be? And I was just like, look, if 2 of the 4 people's names that were just mentioned of the leadership team show up, we can ramble on for at least an hour, right? And if anybody else shows up from outside, you know, or from outside period, or from within the community and wants to ask us kind of what the heck we've been up to, it is limitless where that conversation can go, right? And tandem reflection is such a unique concept, because it's, you know, in ways it fights back against that you know, that need for a lot of minds generating tons of different things, and that's what you want. And obviously we value that, right, with what we do anyway. But the tandem aspect of it is just such an interpersonal level. I think you said it best with that word. There is something different about being able to drop all of the curtains face to face with that one human being and just bounce off of one another, literally just like a ping pong, right? It's just back and forth. What does this look like? What can it be? What can it be? And I think you can actually, yeah, that's really powerful inspiration for facilitation in groups too, I would say.
Yeah. one of the things that was a big breakthrough for me was during designing space. I had to explain the JSOW, like you watch a clip of a video and then you have to draw the systems map. You've probably done this a couple of times already, Chris, where they have you draw things like a visual representation of something, um, and um, and the practice of just drawing, like creating a visual artifact of something, it kind of pulls you out of chaos. It's like, even if I'm in some kind of internal mental chaos, I can take the action of drawing something on a piece of paper, and that helps break me out of kind of these types of entrainment, right? It's like I start to think about what are all of the aspects of the system and how do they all interact? And that's how you start navigating complexity, is by mapping out the system, figuring out which of the components are, and the relationships between the components are most important, and which have to be modulated. So I really like the idea of using a reflective practice, like where somebody could just be asking you questions, or somebody could be pointing to, like one thing that I like to do in kind of dialectical, where I'm like challenging somebody and I'm having a conversation with them, is just point to the language that they're using and have them think about why they're using that language. That's like a therapy technique, right? It's, oh, I noticed that you're using these types of words instead of those types of words. Let's talk about that and whether that accurately reflects your thinking. I see those practices as very similar. What I've found as the what JSOW recommends as visual thinking. Actually, Dave Gray also talks a ton about visual thinking and how that can help you. It's a facilitated practice that you can basically do by yourself, but adding another person in to kind of force those necessary steps of thinking about how you're thinking is such a potentially powerful type of facilitation, and it's something that I think we do. I think some people do intuitively, but putting that on paper and saying, here's a practice that you can do, is a potentially really powerful thing to share with a broader community.
Yeah, it's really hard to explain the sensation of drawing for non-artists as well, I think. Artistic folks or those with graphic design background, or something that is okay with the abstract, I feel like are a lot more inclined to lean into something artistic as far as like visual design or visual thinking would be concerned. But at the same time, me not being an artist at all, other than with words in spirit, right?
Yeah, I've been meaning
I found
to
myself.
I spent a while like Stephen Ogie had the opportunity to hear I developed over the course of several interviews this whole explanation for why we did that drawing systems thing.
Yeah.
And one of them is what you just said, is the lack of creative confidence. Creative confidence is such a necessary ingredient for the facilitation of navigating complexity. If you don't have creative confidence, you're not going to do what you need to do to have those difficult conversations, to even step into the uncomfortableness of being an amateur facilitator in a retrospective, for example. So making people draw things, it gives you that sensation over and over of, oh, I'm terrible. I don't know what to draw. I'm bad at drawing. Oh, do it anyways and see what happens. Just do it. And that's why I like how one of our values is do the work deliberately, because stepping into uncertainty is part of what we do.
Yeah, for sure. Actually, I channeled that, in my first week of the course. I just drew. It wasn't precious to me, but I wanted to get out of my mind through my hand into the paper via the pencil that I had what I thought I saw, right? And I even talked about it in the course, how I related it back to other things that we've done with facilitation and other things I've done in myself. I was like, the drawing wasn't necessarily as important as it was just getting it out of my head onto paper, and then knowing the narrative in my head that went with it. But it was really fun to draw out amongst a team like that, which I feel like we sometimes do in this community with conversations we have, the threads and connections, or lack thereof at times, between how people thought and approached their visual aspect. I found that to be really cool. And I thought it was something that would fit and does fit really well, into our community, because it's just curiosity. It's purely curiosity. I want to know why did you draw that thing different than I did, right? If I saw this and it was a car and I drew a car, but you drew an eagle looking down at a car, why? How did you know or think to get the road in the picture when there wasn't a road? And I think that's just where we humans are just so interesting with just the levels of complexity that's at play with how we view things, how we discuss things, what directions we end up heading down. Like I said, with Agitare, you really don't ever know what direction you're going to go. And I love that. So I'm just naturally curious about where we might go. All right, who's next? Probably got like five or six more minutes. I don't want to keep you guys beyond an hour. This has already been just overwhelmingly awesome for me. So I'm so glad we did this on a Saturday. Wanted to take some time out of y'all's weekends.
Anybody else want to talk about their specific roles within Agitare leadership?
I mean, we know mine, Chief Conversational Officer. I mean, that's too easy. I will say, I put it in chat, but before I had that in, I agree with Austin initially. Like, I showed up and what I wanted more than anything was just to be a part of the community, but finding what that fit looked like was difficult. So amorphous peg was my initial idea of what my position would be, because it's kind of twofold. Number one, I didn't feel like I had a shape. So I didn't know what that sort of product looked like. What was I going to offer that made me a net positive value to the team? And then on top of that, was there anything that was here that I'm just not the right shape for? So kind of like the square peg for the round hole sort of idea. And then really what I found more than anything is just being here and being present and continuing the conversation, and then spreading that conversation elsewhere and getting feedback from other organizations and bringing that feedback in. Like, that's what I've really enjoyed doing. Just sitting in that space. And I know every time Dan talks, it's 2 more books in my reading list. But then what I do is I kind of eat those up, and then I go out and I talk to people who may be interested in that. And I say, hey, what about Agitare? Yeah, I just love to talk, and I love to just sit in these conversations and listen as well, which is super cool. So that's kind of what I do, and that's what I feel I'm good at so far. But we'll see where it grows from here.
Yeah, Steve, I'll echo some of the things that you said there too. I'm still trying to find out exactly where I add the most value to Agitare. I know I want to be here. I enjoy spreading the word and really just sharing what we are about, what we stand for. And we've evolved a bit too. I think a lot of our roles are still evolving. Those will change, it seems like, from time to time. We toyed around for a little while with the idea of having a recruiting officer. And I jumped at the idea of this. I was like, this is awesome. It'll be like the outreach. It'll help with growth. And then we kind of reset and we start to refine our objectives a bit. And we decided, well, maybe the idea, the role of a recruiting officer isn't exactly where we want to be. We want, quantity over, or quality over quantity. We didn't want to spread that outreach in that way. So still trying to figure out where we fit in and what that best idea for a role will look like. So currently I don't have a job title, so to speak, but I show up, I'm passionate about the organization, and I really believe in our cause at Agitare, which is motivating and inspires me to show up every time. And I like to contribute to the conversation where I can and make sure I'm a positive advocate for the organization.
Yeah, I definitely, I want to kind of foot stomp that. In the previous iteration of our OKR board, we had objectives with individuals who were aligned to specific objectives, and I think that worked well for a period of time. And then we've had a period of flexing, and we're resetting our objectives right now. So it's definitely right now we're in a period of, we're really figuring out what the measurable results of achieving those objectives looks like. And we're probably more comfortable with being in that uncertain phase for a longer period of time than most organizations would be. We also have the luxury of being on a very slow kind of timeline because of, I'm not trying to rush people to get, achieve specific things within the next month, right? Because I think that would, because more important than them bringing something to Agitare is making sure that Agitare is what it needs to be for them. And the leadership team is the core of who is getting the most value from the organization. So we need to balance, and we've been hitting on this in the leadership team meetings, which we hold every week now. We need to balance the needs of the organization and our mission against whether the organization is meeting the needs of the individuals within the organization. So that's something that we're constantly reflecting on, and I'm sure that we're going to hit, for people who aren't quite sure what their specific place is, people like Dustin and Steven and Rob and Chris actually at times are continuing by showing up at the leadership team meetings and just generally discussing what we're trying to get after, and then swarming where that need is most urgent. It kind of speaks to the internal complexity of the organization itself, at times much more fluid than any other organization I've ever been a part of.
Yeah, fluid is absolutely, in such a good way, I would say. At times not so much, but for the most part, I feel like it's been so healthy to have that fluidity.
Before we call it, I wanted to hit on a point that Ogie mentioned. Basically, we've all sort of drank the Kool-Aid of, Daniel's book club, as in all the books that he continually recommends, which I think is fantastic, first of all. But sort of the more important thing about that is that we all don't get the same thing out of reading the same book. Even if we were to get exactly the same, concepts, lessons, so on and so forth, from reading the same book, we each have a background that will interpret those exact same lessons differently, which will inevitably inform our practices differently because of that. So it just makes for an interesting dynamic of all of us. Like, yeah, a lot of us have read finite and infinite games, and how we've all sort of taken it or at least how I'm seeing myself take it versus how I've seen Daniel talk about the same thing. And that's interesting. If you don't know how to close out, Chris, I got you.
Well, I was going to ask real quick if, Mike, Tomas, the other Mike I see in here, one of you guys can just fight over who's the other Mike, and Brenda. What were you guys expecting from this call? I know that's such a weird way to end something like this, but it just seems to fit the way Agitare does things. We flip the classrooms, we flip the environment sometimes. It's part of facilitation at times, just kind of pushing a little bit. If you're able to, I'd love to just hear like what you thought this was going to be and what it turned out to be. And I'll leave it.
I'll yes and that, because my thoughts was very in line with that. In addition to what you thought it would be, I pasted our values. Honestly, it happens a lot between us. I pasted our values in the chat. Let us know how you think this event ties back to those, if you thought we even reached that at all. So in terms of feedback, but also let us know how you thought we reached those values today.
I'll go because it's easy. I had no expectations. I was just I was just sitting down after cleaning up the house, and I saw your alert pop up on my Slack. And I just like being around you guys because I always learn something. And
we like you too.
I like to try to find ways to be on the learning side. Since at Naval X, a lot of my time is spent doing admin or being on the teaching side. So I was just coming to absorb information because, like you guys, a lot of my design thinking started via the callcast and seeing Daniel. So I was a student before I joined Naval X. So
right on, man.
Out here.
We're glad to hear you, or glad to have you and hear you. All right, and I'll just let it slowly trickle. Brenda, Mike, Tomas, if you have anything, send it.
Yeah, so no, I mean, I feel like Mike and we share a like mind here. I'm not at Naval X though, but I definitely didn't have expectations coming on the call, and I just like coming on for the growth mindset that your conversations encourage. And so I was actively doing house cleaning while I was listening, Mike. So, like I said, like mind, and yeah, I just appreciate that you guys keep a safe place, and I can listen and use that to encourage my internal reflection.
Yeah, that's what it's all about. I love that curiosity and a place for growth is what drove you. That for us, that means like a lot to know that like our community is even aligning with our values too at times.
Yeah, I like the idea of over the last 8 months, I've been spending a lot more time jumping into stuff where I didn't know what to expect. And I like to do that with Agitare, where we kind of allow to happen what's going to happen, rather than sending out an agenda beforehand and sticking to it, which is, yep. I think a lot of people are really, they almost don't want their time wasted, right? So they're like, tell me exactly what I'm going to learn. Well, if I could tell you what you were going to learn, I could just send you a book, couldn't I? Like,
yeah, if you want me to predict what all of you guys are going to talk about, I mean, I'd be making a lot more money if I could forecast that type of stuff, right? And that kind of leads back to the whole conversation. And honestly, it's probably a good way to cap it off, Austin. I don't know what you think, but that in and of itself is why I didn't necessarily, this was loosely inspired by the Fishbowl concept, meant to be completely open and something that we run monthly, kind of flipping the average, corporate business call that you would see where you can dial in and listen as an employee or whatever. We wanted to do something a little different, turn that upside down, be a community that's transparent. Your leadership team is just here to figure it out along with the community. And yeah, I mean, I think we'll probably kick this off again next month and just see how it grows and goes from there.
Hey, Chris, can I offer a thought?
Sure. Yeah.
So I was meant to listen to this call today. So thank you so much, Dan, for inviting me. You just said something about jumping into something that you weren't and didn't know what to expect. I'm pretty new to DEF, and I'm walking into the charge of pulling together something for DEF Labs that has been talked about for a long time. And all Mike Madrid can talk about is how wonderful and successful Agitare is, but he doesn't really say what it is. So I kind of walked in blind, and I have to tell you, you guys are freaking amazing. I'm leaving, as Dan says, so amped. What you're doing is so important, and you've created your own little lab of design and facilitation where you can experiment. You've created the right atmosphere, you've created the values, you've done all this stuff so that you are both experimenting and practicing, which is something that is fabulous. And my mission to listen today was to figure out the secret sauce and how to bake it into another organization in DEF that can take the same kind of, make sure the same kind of magic is there. But I don't know if this can be recreated, but you've certainly inspired me to try. So thank you for that.
Yeah, there's always what's next. Thank you for that comment. I'm pretty sure I'm going to echo Dan, Austin, Steven, Dustin, the whole team here when I say like that. That means a lot to hear that, and we really appreciate it. If I had to put my finger on one thing, and this could change tomorrow if you ask me, it has been the most relentless transparency that this group has operated under. We've criticized one another at times in the open. We've criticized each other during facilitations in the open, on phone calls, and we're okay with it. There's just no judgment there. If I came in and told Dan and Austin, hey guys, I need to step away for like a month. I'm burnt, I'm beat. Work is getting to me, and I've probably already talked to them about that just because of the way we all operate anyway. It would be okay. And I would come back into the group 2 months later and be just as involved and not judged one bit. But that ability to just be endlessly and relentlessly transparent with one another and as a team, and ideally as a community as we go forward, because we don't have it perfect. That is one thing that I would want to foot stomp as well. We don't have this perfect. We don't think that we ever will, I would say. But what we're trying to achieve is something something unique. The vision that was kicked this whole thing off. When Dan started this was a pretty ambitious Mars shot. Moon shot is, I guess, the trendy term, but I mean, you're trying to bring something to the defense and national security space that's not really as ingrained in the fabric as we would like it to be. So it's a big undertaking. So hearing you say that, Brenda, really means a lot. And we're hugely thankful for DEF. All of us are DEF members anyway. But I think, Dan, you said this back at the DEF Summit, that without DEF, we wouldn't be Agitare, or Agitare wouldn't be what it currently is. So we do have to give that easy plug to give to them. I'll let any closing comments from the leadership team before I cut the recording and throw the call off. Thanks again, Brenda. That was an awesome comment. I really appreciate that.
Yeah, definitely want to say thank you, Brenda. On your point for 2 seconds. How do I word this?
That's time.
Yeah, I know, right?
And
I always have trouble. Okay, so the thing is, there isn't a secret sauce, right? I think each organization is poised to be similar to how Agitare is operating. Again, we're not perfect. In fact, even within our values, the assumption is that those are subject to change regularly. What I found is what it needs is somebody to take the organization or the new organization and set a foundation of this is who we are. With that internal identity comes a lot of belonging to that identity, a lot of safety within that identity. Again, it can't be like an artificial identity. You gotta have the people have buy-in on that identity. But if you let your organization have buy-in on the identity they create for that organization, you're going to find that a lot of what Agitare has will come out of that, or what you see Agitare as happening, I should say.
Yeah, just to mirror that, I brought this up at the Deep Reading Club yesterday, but I've been working on trying to get some thoughts out there for a post on 3 types of alignment that I have not experienced in most other organizations, but I do experience with Agitare, and those are strategic alignment, cultural alignment, and individual alignment. And those are having a strategy which includes rituals and artifacts that everybody can reference regularly, that allow for strategic alignment, that allow for cultural alignment, and allow for individual alignment is kind of, that's what I would say are the, if I were to try and boil it down to a system which includes, wide expanses of extreme need for mutation and growth and nonstop discovery. So yeah, those are kind of things that I'm exploring, and I am very interested in seeing the Def Labs experiment succeed, because I saw what it did for us and for me with my idea, that credit to Jerry McCoy for just kind of saying, I don't know, let's have Def own this stuff for you as long as you need them to. And it gave me the space that I needed to pretend it existed until it did exist. So yeah, so thank you for those comments, and I'm happy to try and help with Def Labs going forward. That's something I'm interested in assisting with. As another final thought, thank you, Chris, for hosting this event. This has been just fantastic, and I'm always happy to be able to jump into Agitare stuff as a participant, and not the I'm trying to step away from that figurehead and linchpin kind of role, because that's not a good thing. So I really appreciate all of you stepping up and making Agitare happen in a way that I could not make happen by myself.
Yeah, man, that's what it's all about. One thing I'll say for everyone, like when we do calls like this that end so deep, I do like to tell people, you know, when it ends and it closes down and we're done recording, we're done doing this call, take a deep breath and internalize it. You can reflect on it afterwards, but first thing first, you know, you're talking about taking 15 large sticky notes. Just breathe a little bit. It's nice to kind of take that deep breath and then get back into what you're doing. I really appreciate all you guys joining. I would have sat here by myself and just recorded myself for an hour just to be really funny, but it's a lot better to do this with other humans. And you guys inspire me. So with that, I'm going to close down and see if this recording saves. I don't know where it goes. I saved it to the cloud. So as long as no one's still, I'll let you guys drop off. If anybody has any issues with the recording, we may use bits and pieces of it depending on what Cuss ends up wanting to do or somebody on the team wants to do. Just let me know if you have any issues with us using the recordings, and we'll take care of having your name blocked out or something. And then join
Thanks,
the
y'all.
Slack.
It's been awesome.
All right, guys, take care.
Thank you.